The message came on a Tuesday evening in November, 3 weeks before Christmas. Not a phone call, not even a text, just a small gray notification on my phone telling me I had been removed from the family group chat. That was how I found out I wouldn't be at Christmas this year. My name is Kenneth Marsh. I'm 58 years old. I'm a retired electrician from Collingwood, Ontario, and I'm going to tell you how the son I raised alone came to cut me out of his life, one quiet inch at a time, until the day I stopped counting the inches and booked a flight to Vancouver instead. Because somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, 35,000 feet in the air, phone switched off, properly at peace for the first time in years. My phone was lighting up with 11 missed calls from the same people who'd been showing me the door for 3 years. Let me go back. Back to that Tuesday evening, standing at my kitchen counter with a mug of tea going cold and a gray notification telling me I was no longer part of the conversation. I live in the same house I've lived in for 31 years. Plain 2-story on Spruce Street, backs up against a hill that gets good snow in January. My wife Joan and I bought it the year my son was born. After she passed, cancer 8 years ago, gone in 6 months, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Too many things in it that still smelled like her. A rocking chair in the bedroom I've never moved. Her handwriting on the inside of the kitchen cupboard where she tracked the kids' heights. Except there was only ever one kid, my son Daniel, and she measured him every August birthday until he left for university, and she stopped having reason to. I didn't cry when I saw the notification. I've done a lot of crying in my life, mostly in the truck, driving back from the hospital the week Joan was dying, hands on the wheel, empty passenger seat. This was something colder. I read the notification. I set the phone face down on the counter, and I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, and finally, honestly, started counting what I had let slide in the name of keeping the peace. You should know what kind of father I was before any of this. When Joan died, my son was 26 and already living in Toronto, but the one who fell apart wasn't him. It was me. He had his life, his apartment, his new girlfriend at the time. I had a house in Collingwood that suddenly felt like a building instead of a home. I threw myself back into work, took on extra jobs, drove to Toronto every 2 months to take him for dinner, usually somewhere near his place, always my treat, always fine. When he told me he and Sabrina were serious, and they wanted to buy a condo together, I sat across from them at a restaurant on King Street and listened to the numbers. The Toronto market, the down payment gap, the way the city had gotten away from them. I didn't mention Joan's bracelet until I got home. Her mother's antique gold sapphire insets, the one thing Joan always said to keep. I called my son the next morning and told him I could cover the gap. He asked how. I told him I'd sorted it. I never said the word bracelet. He'd have refused, and guilt is a heavy coat for a grown man to wear, or for a child of any age for that matter. I did other things too, the ordinary invisible kind that a father does when his kid is building a life. Drove 3 hours to Toronto to help them move into the condo. Came back 2 weekends later to assemble furniture, because my son's back had gone out. Was there the morning my grandson Oliver arrived in the world, sitting in a waiting room in Scarborough, at 3 in the morning, with a bad coffee from the vending machine, counting ceiling tiles. Oliver, 8 years old now, all knees and elbows and a laugh that comes out of him like it can't stop itself. When he was small, maybe 3 or 4, I'd bring him into the garage when he visited and let him hand me tools. He called sawdust wood snow. He called my level a bubble stick. He kept a little notebook where he drew things he wanted to build. The last time I'd seen it, there were 3 pages of drawings. A birdhouse, a bookshelf, and a toboggan. A wooden one, like his great-grandfather apparently had, though I'd never told him that story. Kids pick things up from the air sometimes. Last spring, I promised him we'd build it, the toboggan. Before winter, he made me pinky swear. I found plans online, printed them off, rolled them up, and put them in the drawer under the workbench. I bought the oak boards in June and let them dry over the summer. Then the visits started getting cancelled. Oliver had a lesson. Oliver had a tournament. Oliver had a cold. I'd drive halfway to Toronto sometimes and get a text before the 400. Don't bother today, Dad, something came up. I'd pull into a Tim's, sit with a coffee I didn't want, and drive home. Now, my daughter-in-law. I want to be fair because this is not a simple story about a villain. She's smart, she's driven. She works in public relations for a firm in downtown Toronto, helps companies manage how they're perceived, and she is very good at her job. I know this because she applied those same skills to our family for 3 years. and I barely noticed until the work was nearly done. She never said anything unkind to me directly, not once. She was warm the way a professional is warm, polished, precise, leaving no fingerprints. She called me Kenneth when my son called me Dad. She complimented my house the way someone compliments a heritage building, acknowledging what it was without wanting to spend time in it. She had opinions about how things should look, which was fine, except those opinions eventually extended to opinions about who should be in the picture. The first Christmas after they got married, I hosted. The second year they hosted. The third year I got the restaurant address by text 40 minutes before dinner and understood that I'd been moved from host to guest to afterthought in 3 Decembers. My grandson's 6th birthday. I found out about the party when my daughter-in-law posted photos. When I asked my son about it, he said it had been a small thing. Just her family. He'd meant to tell me. He hadn't meant to tell me. I could hear in his voice that he knew it and couldn't say so. There was a Christmas card that December. Glossy, from one of those online services. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandsons, their dog. I stood in my front hall, holding it and looking for myself, and finding only the blank white back of it. I'd been cropped out of a photo taken at my own kitchen table. I kept saying the same thing to myself every time. Don't make it a thing. Don't be the difficult one. He's busy. He's building a life. She means well. Keep the peace. I said it enough times that it stopped meaning anything, and I kept saying it anyway out of habit. Here's what I understand now that I didn't then. When you make yourself small enough for long enough, people stop noticing you're there at all. You become furniture, and furniture doesn't need an invitation. 2 days after the group chat notification, a letter came. Paper envelope, handwritten address, return address from the Georgian Bay Habitat for Humanity chapter. I opened it at the mailbox in the cold. I won't tell you everything it said, not yet. I want you to understand it, the way others came to understand it later, when it mattered more than I could have imagined standing in my driveway in November. I'll say this much. For 15 years, I'd spent somewhere between 2 and 6 weekends a year building houses with Habitat, framing walls, running wire, finishing basements. I didn't talk about it. It wasn't the kind of thing I thought needed talking about. Joan had wanted to volunteer when she was well, before the diagnosis, and I'd started going after she died, as a way of doing something with my hands when I couldn't sleep. I also set up a small scholarship at Georgian College when I retired, the Joan Marsh Skilled Trades Award. Just a few $1,000s a year out of my RRSP, enough to cover tools and first semester fees for one student going into the trades. I'd never mentioned it to my son, because what would I say? I never did it to be seen. The letter was from the chapter coordinator. The Habitat build that spring was being dedicated in Joan's name. 32 homes over 15 years, my name attached to most of them. They wanted me at the dedication ceremony. I folded the letter back into the envelope, went inside, stood at the kitchen counter. Something shifted in my chest that had been stuck for a long time. Not anger, something steadier. For 3 years, I'd measured myself by whether my son still needed me. That letter reminded me there was a whole community that had never stopped seeing me. That evening, I called my brother. Paul lives in Vancouver, East Van, a small house near Commercial Drive he's owned since the 90s. He teaches woodshop at the high school. My kid brother, who used to sweep my shop, crossing the country and keeping the trade alive. He answered on the second ring. "You sound terrible," he said, which was his way of asking what was wrong. I told him about the group chat. I kept my voice level. He was quiet. Then, "Come out for Christmas, Kenny. Just come." "It's Christmas," I said. "You've got your own plans." My plan is for my brother to not spend the holidays alone in an empty house pretending he's fine. A pause. Book the flight. So I did. Right there at the kitchen table on the laptop. WestJet, Toronto Pearson to Vancouver, December 23rd. Non-stop. I closed the laptop and for the first time in months felt like a man making a decision instead of absorbing one. There was one thing I hadn't reckoned with, the letter in the drawer, and what saying yes to it would set in motion. I called the Habitat coordinator the next morning planning to decline. I had a flight, I had packing. It seemed like the wrong time for anything ceremonial, but she wouldn't hear it. "Kenny," she said. "She's known me since the first build. The ceremony is the 21st. Your flight is the 23rd. Don't tell me you can't come." "I'll think about it," I said. "Think fast," she said. "It's in 4 days." I hung up and a strange thought settled over me. My son had no idea who his father was. I've since pieced together what was happening at their end around that same time. My son told me some of it. My daughter-in-law told me more later, when she was trying to explain rather than defend. Her firm had been chasing a significant new client for months, a developer, older money, Georgian Bay connections, foundation work, who was getting into affordable housing advocacy and needed communications support, the kind of account that moves careers. The client had his own connections to Habitat, had known the Georgian Bay chapter for years, had matched the Joan Marsh scholarship donation 2 years running, without anyone in my family knowing, because why would they? When her firm sat down for a preliminary meeting, the client mentioned the upcoming dedication, Joan's name on the build, and he asked conversationally whether anyone on their team had Georgian Bay roots, because the community figures involved in that chapter were exactly the kind of authentic story his foundation wanted to stand beside. My daughter-in-law said nothing, because for 3 years she had described her in-laws to her colleagues the way you'd describe something inherited that you weren't sure what to do with. Small town, retired, nothing that moves the needle. She had spent 3 years making sure her professional world and my world never touched. They touched in a boardroom on Bay Street 2 days before I was set to fly west. I didn't know any of this yet. I only knew I had decided to go to the dedication and then to Vancouver, and that both decisions for the first time in longer than I could name felt entirely my own. My grandson called me that Thursday on his mother's old tablet. He'd figured out how to reach me from his room, which told me more about the situation in that house than anything my son had said. His face filled the screen, nose too close. "Grandpa, are you coming for Christmas?" I chose my words carefully. You don't put grown-up poison in a child's cup. "Not this year, buddy. I'm going to see Uncle Paul in Vancouver." But we were going to build a toboggan. His voice dropped at the end of the sentence. Not a question. "We still are." "You pinky promised." I did, and I keep those. He looked down, then back up, voice lower, like someone had told him to be quiet. "Grandpa, how come you're not coming?" Something moved in another room. I kept my voice like flat water. "That's not for you to figure out, buddy. Your job is to be 8. "I have to go." The screen went black. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time. Outside, the first real snow of the season had started on the hill, the kind my grandson used to watch from this same window with both hands pressed against the glass. The dedication ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon in Meaford, at the community hall. I almost didn't go. I had the drive to justify, the packing, the early morning flight in 2 days. 12 reasons that were really one reason in different coats. The coordinator called at noon. "Are you in the car?" "Not yet." "Kenneth Marsh, I have been waiting 15 years for you to let people say thank you. Get in the car." The hall was fuller than I'd expected. Habitat volunteers, Georgian College staff, a reporter from the Owen Sound paper, families of over the years. Someone had put together a display, photographs going back to my first build, Joan's name on a banner behind the podium. I sat near the back. I'm not comfortable in the front of rooms. I build things precisely so I don't have to stand in front of rooms. The coordinator spoke first. Then a woman in the 3rd row stood up and said her son had started his plumbing apprenticeship because of the Joan Marsh Award, that he now ran his own crew in Barrie. Then a man near the back said his family's home, the one his children had grown up in, had gone up in a single spring, and my name had been in the volunteer record. One by one, people stood. I lost count. I looked at those faces and understood something I hadn't known I needed to know. These people had never once made me feel like an inconvenience. After the ceremony, a man found me by the coffee table. Expensive coat, firm handshake. He introduced himself, the developer, as it turned out, the one my daughter-in-law's firm had been pitching for months. I didn't know that yet. "You're Kenneth Marsh," he said. "Not a question. I've been matching that scholarship for 2 years. Wanted to meet you." We talked easily, the way two people talk when they both know what it is to work with their hands, regardless of how different those hands have been in other respects. He asked casually whether I was local or had come from far. "Collingwood," I said. "My son's in Toronto." "Small world. What does he do?" "His wife works in public relations," I said. "A firm downtown." A pause, just a small one. "Not Meridian Partners?" I didn't know the name. I said I wasn't sure. He looked at me steadily. "I had a meeting with them this week. Your daughter-in-law never mentioned you." Another pause. That's strange. Because if my father-in-law were the man this entire room just stood up for, I'd have led with it. He shook my hand again and drifted back into the crowd. I stood there with a paper cup of coffee and turned it over slowly. For 3 years, my daughter-in-law had kept the distances so carefully managed, the worlds so separate. It had never once occurred to her that they might find each other without her hand on them. They'd found each other on a Saturday afternoon in Meaford over bad coffee with 200 witnesses and her firm's most important potential client doing the arithmetic. I hadn't planned it, I couldn't have, but I felt the ground move, just slightly, under a woman who wasn't in the room. The morning of the 23rd. Pearson at 6 in the morning, the terminal nearly empty, gray December light through the windows. I found my gate, sat down with a paperback I wouldn't read. Somewhere between boarding and leveling out over the shield, I turned my phone all the way off. Not silent, off, black screen. I wanted the quiet, 6 hours of it, I'd earned it. When I turned the phone back on somewhere over the Rockies, we still had an hour to Vancouver. 1 bar of signal, the screen loaded all at once. Missed call, missed call, missed call. The number climbed faster than I could follow, my son's name over and over. 11 missed calls. I sat very still. The man beside me was asleep. A child 2 rows up was singing quietly to herself. And I held 11 missed calls from the son who had removed me from his family chat 3 weeks ago, and I stared at that number, the way you stare at something that hasn't finished becoming what it is yet. There was a text underneath them, 1 line. Dad, call me when you land. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I set the phone on my knee. I looked out at the mountains below, white and enormous, completely indifferent. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. Some small, tired part of me felt the satisfaction of a man who'd been told for 3 years he didn't fit. But it passed quickly, the way those things do when underneath it is still your son. And he sounds like he's been crying. I landed at YVR just before noon. My brother was meeting me past baggage. But first, at the end of the jetway, I stood still and called my son back. He answered before the first ring finished. Dad. His voice was rough. I've been calling since yesterday. I know, my phone was off on the flight. Then it all came out. The dedication, the photos a board member had posted to the chapter's social media page overnight. The client who'd called his wife's firm not to continue the pitch, but to ask quietly why her father-in-law had been invisible to her until now. The banner with Joan's name. 32 homes, the scholarship, all the things my son had never known and had never thought to ask. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked on the question. Any of it. Why didn't you ever say? Because it wasn't yours to be impressed by, I said. I did it because your mother would have wanted it. Because somebody helped me once when I was starting out and I didn't forget. Silence then. I didn't know about the bracelet either. He said Sabrina had told him the night before, when the full story of the client call came out and everything else came with it. He said he'd sat in his kitchen and couldn't figure out how he'd missed so much of his own father. She kept telling me you'd make everything complicated, he said. That you needed careful handling. I knew that wasn't right, but I kept letting her reframe things until I didn't recognize what I actually knew about you. I let him sit in that. You don't rush a man past the moment he's realizing something true. I asked about my grandson. He said my grandson was fine, that he'd been asking for me and been told Grandpa was busy, and that my son had finally stopped being able to say it with a straight face. Daniel, I said, I'm not asking for Christmas back. That's not what this call is. I know. What do you want? My grandson, I said it carefully. The way you carry something you don't want to drop. I want to be his grandfather without permission slips. I want to call him on a Tuesday for no reason and not go through anyone. I want to build the toboggan I promised him. Yes, no hesitation. God, yes, of course. I want your word on that, I said. Not just this year. Every year. You have it. A pause. She's not in the house, Dad. I asked her to stay with her sister for a few days. I needed to think. I needed to be able to look at Oliver without being ashamed of what I let happen. I stood in the arrivals level and closed my eyes. You're raising him right, I said finally. He called me on an old tablet from his bedroom, because he didn't want anyone to know. That's not a kid who's been damaged beyond what love can reach. My son laughed, the first time in years I'd heard him laugh without something careful underneath it. He's been driving me crazy about the toboggan. Tell him I've got the plans in my bag. Carried them from Collingwood. The phone shuffled, small hands, fast breathing. Grandpa, are you in Vancouver for real? For real. Just landed. Uncle Paul has a dog. His name is Biscuit. I googled his street. Is there really a mountain right there? That's probably Grouse Mountain, buddy. Is there real snow on it? Real snow. Grandpa, his voice went serious, the way it does when something matters. The toboggan? Still this winter? You and me, I said. Oak boards, brass runners, the whole thing. I've got the plans in my coat pocket right now. He went quiet a moment, then, barely above a breath, I never stopped adding drawings. I have 6 pages now. I never opened a new notebook. I kept the same one. I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth for a second. I know you did, bud, I said. This winter we're going to make a whole pile of wood snow. My brother was wading past the barrier, taller than I remembered, gray at the temples now, grinning like he'd won something. He didn't say anything clever. He just pulled me in and held on. You came, he said. You told me to. First time in 60 years, you listened to me. We drove out to East Van through rain that turned to early dark. He talked the whole way. His students, a girl in his grade 11 class who was better at dovetail joints than anyone he'd ever taught. Biscuit the dog, a woman named Constance he'd met at a contra dance and wasn't sure what to do about. I listened and let the city move past the window and felt the tight thing in my chest slowly, completely unknot. That evening he made dinner. Roast chicken, oven potatoes, a bottle of Ontario wine I'd brought in my checked bag. We ate at a small table while the rain came down outside. And my brother told a story about the worst table he'd ever built. And I told him about the toboggan plans. And we laughed until we were out of breath. And for the first time since Joan died, a holiday didn't feel like something to survive. He raised his glass. To Kenny Marsh, he said, who finally figured out that being wanted is not the same as making himself needed. I looked at my glass a long time before I lifted it. Real Christmas came 3 days later. My son drove out with my grandson. Just the two of them, 6 days, Biscuit going insane with the extra energy in a small house. We cooked all day on the 25th. My brother burned the first batch of dinner rolls. My grandson dropped an entire bowl of cranberry sauce and froze, terrified. And then my brother and I started laughing, and my grandson understood he was allowed to laugh too. And that was the moment everything shifted back. At dinner, my brother pulled out the chair at the head of the table. That one's yours, Kenny. I sat down in it, not because I'd fought for it, or proven something, or waited to be told there was room, because these people wanted me there. Wanted, not tolerated. I hadn't understood the distance between those two words until I'd spent 3 years on the wrong side of it. My grandson, across the table with a mouthful of potato, announced to the room that his grandpa had built 32 houses, and nobody even knew about it. Not quite 32, I started. It's still a huge deal, Grandpa, deadly serious. My brother raised his glass, I raised mine first. January was cold and clear. The good Ontario winter that makes everything feel clean and honest. My grandson came out to Collingwood for a week. We cleared the back half of the garage, and I unrolled the toboggan plans on the workbench, soft at the creases from folding and unfolding all those months. We worked every morning. He learned to measure twice. He learned that oak doesn't forgive a crooked cut. He got a splinter on day 2 and wore it like a medal for 3 days. We talked while we worked, the way you can only really talk when your hands are busy, and neither of you needs to perform anything for the other. He told me about school, about a friend who'd moved away, about missing his dad being sad, which he said the way kids say the plainest and truest things, just straight out, no softening. People are complicated, I told him, even the ones who let us down. You're allowed to miss someone and feel relieved at the same time. Both things can be true. He thought about it. Is that how you felt about Dad? More or less, I said. He nodded, like that settled something that had been asking to be settled. My son came for the last 2 days. He stood in the garage doorway watching for a while. He'd brought coffee from Tim's the Large and set mine on the shelf without being asked, without making a show of it. At some point in the afternoon, he picked up a piece of sandpaper and started on the runners, and I led him. And we finished that way, the 3 of us, with the shavings piling up on the floor like something new beginning. The morning my grandson had to go home, we carried the toboggan out to the hill behind the house. First snow of the year that was deep enough. He climbed on. I gave him a push. He went down fast, arms out, hit a shallow bump near the bottom and nearly went sideways. And then he was at the bottom, laughing so hard he couldn't stand up. My son, beside me at the top of the hill, watched without saying anything for a long moment. Then, thank you for not walking away. I watched my grandson drag the toboggan back up through the snow toward us, breath coming out in clouds. I wasn't going to walk away, I said. A father's door doesn't close that easily. A few weeks later, a message came through. Not a group chat notification, a direct message from my daughter-in-law. She asked if she could call. I let 2 days pass, then I called her back. She was careful and honest in equal measure, which I think cost her more than she let on. She said she had spent her whole career learning to control how things looked, and she had brought that instinct home. And she hadn't understood how much damage it was doing until it was standing in a boardroom telling her that the man she'd made invisible was the man her client most wanted to talk about. I don't need an apology for the group chat, I told her. What I need is simpler than that. My grandson calls me when he wants to. No skittle, no approval, no filtered visits. I exist in that boy's life without conditions. She said yes. I could hear in her voice that she'd reached the actual floor of something. I wish her no harm. I want to be clear about that. She built a version of our family where she held all the edges, and it held until the day it met something it couldn't manage. What does a person do with that except try to build something that holds better? I can tell you now how things have settled. I see my grandson whenever I want. He calls me most weeks on his own, sometimes just to show me a drawing or a bug he found, or a question he has about wood. The toboggan lives at the pond trail back home. He sends me photos of it every time he visits. My son and I talk the way we used to, before anyone taught him to be careful about it. Real conversations. He's building a life that's actually his again. Here's what I want to leave you with. Late winter, after the snow had gone from most of the hill, but was still thick near the fence, where the sun doesn't reach, my grandson called me on a Sunday, just to show me a drawing he'd made in his notebook, an extension of the toboggan plans. He wanted to add a rope handle and a small storage box near the front for carrying things. He'd sketched it carefully, measured angles, the whole thing. He held the tablet up. Is this possible, Grandpa? I looked at it, tipped my head. In principle, I said. We'd have to reinforce the front cross brace. Is that hard? Not with the right tools. Can we start this summer? You and me, I told him. Measure twice, cut once. He grinned, that full, unguarded grin that kids have before someone teaches them to be careful about what they show. You always say that. Because it's always true, I said. And because some things, once you build them right, hold.